Ho! Welcome to my tavern. Tell me, have you ever felt the world of Arcane literally swallow you up as soon as you immerse yourself in its atmosphere? As a true League of Legends fan, I could not stay indifferent, and I've gotta confess, it is something truly amazing. At the same time, one question haunts me. Can this story become part of the game's canon? Unfortunately, I have to disappoint you. Arcane is still a separate story. Riot is not even in a rush to make the series an official part of the lore. This raises a lot of questions among fans because the characters in the series are so different from their canon versions in the game. So today I'm gonna do a little investigation for you guys and reveal all the differences between League of Legends and Arcane. Are you guys ready for an adventure? Let's go! In Arcane, the action takes place in Piltover and Zaun. They are presented according to the canon. Piltover is the city of progress, and Zaun is a city polluted by industrial waste. However, in the first season of Arcane, they are not yet separate cities, unlike in the canon, where the entire lore of the characters is written in a time period where Piltover and Zaun are separated. But here is the most interesting part. There are moments where the timeline in Arcane is broken, especially with Viktor's lore, but more on that later. Let us start with the characters on whom the main storyline in Arcane is based, Jinx and Vi. Vi's original background is quite different. Her biography reads, her parents were believed to have died in an industrial accident. Vi grew up in an outdated orphanage called Hope House, but one crazy some scrapper claimed to have found her in the ruins of a chemical lab. So yes, in the main universe, she was an orphan from the beginning. But in Arcane, she originally had parents who died not in a chemical lab but at the hands of enforcers in a battle on the bridge. Also in Arcane, Vi had a sister named Powder, or Jinx as we know her. Interestingly, in the canonical lore, when Vi was found, the girl was lying in a cradle designed for 2 children. In the end, Vi decided that some secrets were better left unsolved. This shows us that either Vi was the only child of her biological parents and happened to be lying in a crib for 2 children, or she was separated from her sibling as an infant. And yes, when I say sibling, I mean that it is not known whether she had a sister or a brother, let alone that it was Jinx. That is because there is no confirmation in any other canonical sources that Jinx is her relative. But there is one interesting fact. In Warwick's lines, there are references to Vi and Jinx which hint that Warwick was indeed a human before he was turned into a beast by his Singed. Namely, Warwick is the same Vander we see in Arcane. From Warwick's biography, we learn that he used to be a man but now is a beast. For Warwick, memories of past times are flashes, and then invariably disappear. And perhaps one of those flashes in Warwick's line to Jinx in the game, "You were there," I think it has a deep meaning. It is a reference to the events in Arcane, where Jinx disobeyed Vi and secretly came to help save Vander, but made an incorrigible mistake that resulted in his death as a human being. But still, even this does not prove that Jinx is related to Vi, since in the game's lore she could have been in that situation simply as a villain who decided to set off an explosion as an act of her madness and unhealthy psyche. Unfortunately, there are no notes about this in the canonical stories, so we are left to speculate here. By the way, it is worth mentioning that Vander is still a canon character for the game's universe, although his name was not revealed because it was kept secret for Arcane. Vi's bio reads, the owner of a bar on the edge of the lanes took the girl under his wing and managed to cool her temper a bit. He helped her form moral principles, taught her restraint in battle, and explained how to control her anger. This theory is supported by Warwick's remarks to Vi. Who taught you how to punch? And here we come to where Vi got those first gauntlets, which were not yet hextech. Here, the story is different. In Arcane, Vi used Vander's iron gauntlets, which served him well in battle in his youth. But in the canon story, she got them in a completely different way. Vi planned to rob a rich mine but needed helpers. The girl reluctantly recruited a gang of her rivals, the Factory Wood Fiends. During the robbery, the leader of the Fiends killed the owner of the mine with huge crushing mining gloves. He locked the workers in a tunnel. Both gangs were already running away with the loot, but Vi realized that she could not leave innocent people to their fate. She took the gauntlets and managed to punch the miner's way to the surface. Interestingly, after these events in the game universe, Vi mentions the civil war that is to take place in the second season of Arcane. Here's what the canonical story says. Sometime later, when relations between Zaun and Piltover became strained, Vi disappeared. The truth was revealed when the brutal gang, All Hungry Scars, which was rampaging through the upper town, was taken down by Sheriff Piltover and her new ally Vi. The former leader of the gang now worked for the Wardens, and she replaced her chemical spray gauntlets with a pair of brand new Hextech Atlas prototypes. As for me, Vi's character in Arcane is modified, although the canonical story does not mention why she joined Caitlyn. I can assume that at some point in her life she got tired of fighting, stealing, and everything else. Vi changed her outlook on life, taking the side of the law, considering the behavior of Zaun's inhabitants to be dangerous and harmful to society. Why did she become so righteous? It is not clear, but I kind of like the character of Vi in Arcane much better. It is thought out to the smallest detail. There she cares about her fellow Zaunites and doesn't want Piltover to get involved in their disputes. She does her best to preserve the place where she grew up, but her beliefs were mostly influenced by the fact that she had a sister in Arcane. Vi wanted to protect her with all her might and pull her out of the moral state she was in. However, in the canonical story, Vi did have a connection with Jinx, but only as a previously unknown criminal. This can be seen in the last words of Vi's biography. No one knows how Vi came to work with Caitlyn. Given the righteous nature of the crimes that have recently hit Piltover, it can be assumed that some blue-haired hellion from Zaun is involved. In fact, the phrase blue-haired hellion from Zaun can fully describe the entirety of Jinx's lore from the canonical story. The game does not mention her past, childhood, or even why she went crazy. The story shows us just a crazy girl with a whole arsenal of deadly weapons who wreaks havoc just because it's fun? There is no possible explanation for the connection to Vi, Vander, or even a mention of Silco. In fact, even in the game's lore, she hardly interacts with any characters. Apart from the fact that Caitlyn and Vi are always trying to catch her, Jinx has one and only story in the game universe, a connection with the character Ziggs, who is absent in Arcane. But even so, she does not consider him real, just her imagination. It is worth mentioning that in the Arcane series, we see one of the coolest scenes where Jinx fights Ekko. There are also shots that show they used to be friends in childhood and played together. But even that did not happen in the canonical lore, as we later learned from Ekko's story. His story from the game world is also very different. He has parents here. Moreover, we learn from Zeri's story that she once saved Ekko's parents in an accident, at the factory that is. In Arcane though, the boy is another orphan in Zaun. Throughout his childhood, Ekko watched his parents work hard in dangerous factories to afford to send their son to Piltover for a better future. But Ekko saw it differently. He was proud of his origins. He saw that for all its shortcomings, Zaun was full of energy and great potential. It was his conscious decision to stay in Zaun. Over there, he befriends the orphans and forms a gang called the Lost Children of Zaun. This is somewhat like his gang, the Firelights from Arcane, which of course does not exist in the main universe. One day, alone while exploring the ruins of a recently exploded lab, Ekko found an amazing thing, a shard of Hextech crystal. This lab belonged to Viktor, which was later destroyed by Jayce in the main lore. But all this hasn't happened yet in Arcane, as Ekko has not created his invention called the Z-Drive by the end of the first season. Perhaps these events await us in the second season of the series. Once again, as in the case of Va, Ekko's character in Arcane is modified, but, in my opinion, for the better. In the main universe, Ekko is portrayed as a boy genius, an inventor, who is capable of new discoveries for the progress of Zaun, and he does not care about anything but that. He does not give a damn about some Jinx who is wreaking havoc in Piltover as well as Zaun. He's completely immersed in inventions. But in Arcane, he's a boy with a keen sense of justice who is always trying to stop evil and save everyone. Jinx noticed this character trait in one of the scenes.
Look who it is, the boy savior.
Also in the show, Ekko is such a kind soul that he created a place where he gathered orphans, which he shares with Heimerdinger, who was forced to resign from the Piltover Council. This yodel sincerely shows his admiration and delight at what he has seen. This can't be said about Heimerdinger's lore in the canonical universe. These two do not know each other at all. Although in both universes he's a great inventor in Runeterra, Heimerdinger in the canonical lore has the atmosphere of a mad scientist. He builds incredible theories and is ready for any experiments, which is not in the case in Arcane. He's always scared of the potential of Hextech, and in general, he's a retired old fart. And yes, it is not clear how he got into Piltover in the game's lore, and apparently, judging by his bio, he has no ties to Jayce and Viktor. Since we've already touched on these two, let us move on to their stories, incredible ones that is, without delay. In the mainstream universe, Jayce's background may be quite different. First of all, nothing is known about his childhood and family, and the last name Talus is not mentioned anywhere at all. In the canon, this character has no last name, only a first name. Judging by his lore, Jayce was originally born and stayed in Piltover, unlike Arcane. There, we see that due to some circumstances, the boy and his mother are crossing a snowy region. It is highly likely that this is Freljord, because then we see a man who looks like Rise. From the biography of this character, he was indeed once in Freljord. Here's an excerpt. He realized that right after sunset, the trolls would come to the village and leave no one alive. But outside the village, they faced dangers worse than trolls. Rise waded through the deep Freljordian snow to avoid looking at those he had left behind, for these were the faces of the dead, and he had to protect the living. Here we can assume that he accidentally came across Jayce and his mother. Rise must have felt sorry for them and used the world rune to save the two. But let us get back to Jayce. Based on this situation, the boy fell in love with magic and decided to become a scientist and Piltover to lead the city to progress, as well as to unravel the mysterious magic that once saved his life. In the canonical story, Jayce is a true Piltovian who was raised in the traditions that brought greatness to his city. People here invent and strive for new discoveries. Jayce has a gift for delving into the structure of machines, and he was honored to become the youngest apprentice in the history of the Gottaaaa clan, one of the most respected in the city's ruling elite. Not only is there no mention of the Gottaaaa clan in Arcane, but here he receives support from the Kiriman family. Once the Gottaaaa clan found a hex crystal, but the most interesting thing is that in Camille's lore, we learn that hex crystals have been found long ago because her pharaoh's family were the first to find them and made a fortune extracting crystals from the bracken, creatures found only in Shurima. The pharaoh's clan was mentioned at least a little in Arcane, but the Gottaaaa clan, in which Jayce was supposed to be, did not appear for a minute. However, after joining the Gottaaaa clan, Jayce spent almost all of his youth designing hex-tech devices and developing transformable multifunctional tools for Piltover's workers. The difference is that in the canonical lore, hex-tech-based inventions were already fully developed by this time. But in Arcane, firstly, it was Jayce who invented hex-tech, and secondly, he was only given the go-ahead to create hex-tech gates for transporting goods to other regions. It is worth saying that in the main universe, Jayce's personality is greatly modified. He is arrogant and conceited, unlike in Arcane. No matter what Jayce did, he would thump his nose at his peers every time. Many things came easy to Jayce, and he never understood why his peers had such a hard time with what he thought was the easiest thing to do. As a result, almost everyone who worked with Jayce thought he was an arrogant brat who would never slow down and wait for his colleagues to catch up. At the same time, in Arcane, he really cared about others and even stopped the development of Hextech in the name of people's safety. He saw with his own eyes the consequences of using such weapons after he accidentally killed a boy at one of Silco's factories. So, in the canon, compassion for others is simply alien to him. A little later, there was only one person who was as smart as Jayce and who also showed a healthy indifference to his arrogant schemes. It was Viktor. The two masters met at a mandatory Progress Day party and immediately became friends. In Arcane, though, their meeting took place after Jinx blew up Jayce's lab. However, Viktor recognized the young man's talent. Soon after, they started working together. Thanks to Viktor, who challenged many of Jayce's hypotheses, he had success in broadening his horizons. If Jayce tried to improve humanity with the help of various technologies, Viktor fought against the inherent flaws of the human race, whether physical decay or senseless prejudices. Together, Jayce and Viktor developed a mechanized unit for port workers called Piltover Customs. However, the friends reached an impasse while developing the next model of the suit because, according to Viktor's plan, it contained a chemical implant. Viktor claimed that his invention would drastically reduce the number of accidents, but Jayce believed that it was immoral to take away a person's free will. Arguing over the project, they almost got into a fight. In the end, Jayce disgraced Viktor's invention in front of the entire academy, and Viktor was stripped of all his privileges and expelled from the Piltover scientific community. In proud solitude, Jayce continued to work on his research, and that is where he got the Hex Crystal. In Arcane, he received it from the Kiraman family, and in the main universe from the Gottaaaa clan. But it's not that simple. Jayce volunteered to do some experiments with the crystal and once again showed his bad character. He arrogantly claimed that the other scientists in the clan were not smart enough to conduct the experiment successfully. But the leadership of the Gottaaaa clan decided to hand the crystal over to more polite specialists and thus teach Jayce a lesson for his tactlessness. Many months later, the scientists came to a unanimous conclusion. The crystal was useless, just a piece of stone without any energy. The disappointed clan leader eventually handed the crystal over to Jayce, believing that even he, with all his intelligence, would not be able to do anything with it. Jayce started experimenting. Those experiments were somewhat similar to those he conducted in Arcane, but in the main universe, he did it without Viktor. After a while, Jayce approached the task from a completely different angle. He thought that instead of experimenting with the whole crystal, he should conduct more aggressive experiments on a small fragment. During this, there was a power surge, but in Arcane, it was a whole explosion. Viktor noticed this radiation. When he showed up at Jayce's lab, he came with a simple proposition. The fact is that all this time, Viktor had been conducting his own experiments and had finally learned how to fulfill his long-held dream of eradicating disease, hunger, and anger. Viktor said that for the Great Evolution, he needed only one thing, an energy source similar to Jayce's crystal. Jayce refused, reminding Viktor that all he really needed was the right moral compass. And then, the men fought again. When Jayce came to his senses, he saw that Viktor, although he had taken the Shuriman crystal, had not bothered to take the shard. Without hesitation, Jayce removed the shard from the melt and built it into a huge transforming hammer, a destructive invention he had abandoned years ago because he could not find a powerful enough energy source. Though he had no idea where Viktor had taken the crystal, he could feel the vibration coming from the Hextech hammer. It was calling him down to Zaun. Upon reaching Viktor, Jayce saw a terrible scene. Dozens of dead bodies with sawn-off skulls, from which all the contents had been removed. When he found Viktor, the latter had a bunch of robots in his lab that rushed at Jayce. Also, Viktor had managed to tinker with himself, making himself half robotic. Horrified and furious, Jayce decided for the first time in his life to throw away all thought and just smash everything. He rushed to the sparkling crystal and hit it with his hex hammer as hard as he could, smashing the mysterious stone. A shockwave erupted from the stone, knocking them all to the ground and destroying the entire lab. A bit earlier, I told you the story of Ekko. It was some time after the events with Jayce and Viktor that Ekko was rummaging through this ruined lab and found a piece of hex crystal. In general though, the main differences in Jayce's story are that his hammer is a working tool that uses the energy of a small shard of hex crystal. Similarly, the gauntlets Vi started wearing when she joined the Enforcers were not Jayce's invention. He just figured out how to charge them with hex crystal energy. He also had no ties to the Kiraman family and was not appointed as an advisor to Piltover Council. And there is no mention of his ties to Heimerdinger. He was not involved in Zaun's affairs. In short, he was just a scientist with a bad temper. Jayce would stop at nothing to make progress in Piltover. Before we move on to Viktor's lore, let us take a look at Caitlyn's lore. For all the differences in Arcane, this character is probably the closest to her canon version. Caitlyn Kiraman was born into an influential family. Her parents worked for Piltover, but Caitlyn did not. She just lived a normal life, surrounded by the love of her parents. And as I mentioned, She had no ties to Jayce and was not involved in Zaun's affairs because the main conflict that happens in Arcane is related to Silco, who is absent in the main lore. So everything that happens in the series did not happen in her life. But how did Caitlyn become an officer in Piltover in the canon? It all happened after an unknown person, wearing the symbol of C, kidnapped her parents. The girl immediately set out to find them and managed to save them. Also here she receives a Hextech rifle from her parents to replace her hunting musket. She continues to investigate the case related to C. Again, this was not the case in Arcane, but perhaps Caitlyn is closest to canon as her timeline in the series was simply skipped. So there wasn't much to change here except for the fact that she did not know Jayce, and Vi inexplicably appeared in her life in the canon story. This is described in the following passage. Recently, she has been going on missions with a newcomer from Zaun, a spirited and reckless girl named Vi. The most ridiculous rumors are circulating about how this unexpected tandem was formed and why the partners are so good at what they do. The enforcers gossip around it tirelessly in the taverns, and those who are put behind bars by Caitlyn and Vi puzzle over it. Finally, let's move on to Viktor. There are more differences in Viktor's history. Just like in Arcane, Viktor was born in Zaun. He spent all his time researching. Viktor studied many accidents and incidents that occurred in Zaun and came to the conclusion that the human factor was most often the cause. That is why he is so attracted to body modifications with mechanical implants. Because of his desire to improve safety at work, the Fredersen Chemforge company took an interest in him and decided to hire him. Working for this company, Viktor achieved success. His inventions, which allowed him to automate processes, reduced the number of accidents in the shop to 0 within a month. Soon, other industrialists asked him for help, and Viktor's inventions spread throughout Zaun. This is where the differences with Arcane can be traced. When Viktor was 19, he was offered a place at Zaun's prestigious Academy of Techmaturgy. It was there that Professor Stanwyck from Piltover became interested in Viktor's work. He offered the young man to move from Zaun to Piltover for the opportunity to study and work in modern labs. So in the main universe, it was Stanwyck who convinced Viktor to move to Piltover. But in Arcane, it was Heimerdinger who offered him a place in Piltover. The thing is, in the Arcane universe, Stanwyck died a long time ago. This is confirmed by the statue of Stanwyck, which we can see in one of the episodes of the first season of Arcane. Do you guys remember the moment when at the beginning I said that Arcane has a broken timeline? So by the time Viktor got to Piltover as a scientist, in the main universe, Piltover and Zaun had long been known as two different cities. In Arcane, we see that it is still one city, Piltover, which is actually called the Upper and Lower City. The council voted for the possibility of dividing into Piltover and Zaun only at the very end of the first season. That is why it would have been simply not logical for Viktor to study at Zaun University. Zaun simply does not exist in Arcane yet. Perhaps it will emerge in the second season, when the two parts will be separated. Further, as we'll learn from Jayce's story, he and Viktor met at a mandatory Progress Day party. But also from Viktor's story, we'll learn that before their fight, Zaun had a chemical leak that devastated entire neighborhoods, and Viktor came home to offer his help. Using several highly sophisticated cognitive circuits and his existing robotics experience, he designed the Blitzcrank Golem to clean up the streets. Blitzcrank saved many lives, and its intelligence exceeded Viktor's expectations. The consequences of the leak were eliminated, but Viktor stayed in Zaun, wanting to help those who were exposed to the toxins. He tried to use Blitzcrank's capabilities and his techno-magic skills to save the victims. Unfortunately, this attempt was not successful. The death toll could not be reduced, and the team broke up. Viktor took the tragedy in Zaun hard, but this work allowed him to learn a lot about how to improve human anatomy with the help of technology. When he returned to Piltover a few months later, Viktor learned that Professor Stanwyck had held a symposium on the invention of Blitzcrank and had taken credit for Viktor's research. The inventor filed a formal complaint with the Academy administration, but his excited speeches about how he had created Blitzcrank did not move anyone. He turned to Jayce to confirm his words, but his colleague refused to stand up for Viktor, which made their relationship even more tense. The issue was resolved in favor of Professor Stanwyck. Of course, Viktor was indignant. But despite this, he returned to work with Jayce, and together they built a diving suit. Then everything else happened that I told you earlier in Jayce's story. As you guys can see, the difference is very noticeable. Viktor is not sick with anything in the main universe, and mostly his story depends on Stanwyck, who is not even alive in the Arcane universe. Yeah. Also, in the series, Viktor was supported by Heimerdinger, who is not even mentioned in the main lore. There is a very high probability that in the canonical lore, Heimerdinger does not appear in Piltover's affairs at all, not messing with them. In Arcane, it will be interesting to watch Viktor's experiments because there, he is literally trying to save his own life. In the main universe, he's just improving his own body to ensure he's not capable of making mistakes that will put people in danger. He was trying to make people better, to help them push the limits of their natural abilities to avoid mistakes and save lives. It is also very interesting that in Arcane we see some footage from Viktor's childhood where he accidentally met Singed. But in the main lore though, these two characters have no mention of any connection to each other. Let us compare Singed's lore from the two universes. In the mainstream universe, he was born in Piltover to an ordinary family, but already as a child he showed a remarkable mind and boundless curiosity. The laws of nature fascinated him, and Singed entered the prestigious Piltover University to study them. Singed's natural science research was very profound, even revolutionary, but it was at this time that Piltover invented Hextech. Singed found himself out of business as he considered magic a kind of a crutch for those who could not or simply did not want to understand how the world works. In the academic community, Singed spoke out harshly about Hextech as a newfangled trend for fools. He immersed himself in the study of chemistry and alchemy. The colleagues made fun of Singed, considering him an eccentric. Soon he lost his funding and had to leave first the university and then Piltover to start a new life in Zaun. Arcane also mentions that he used to work in Piltover with Heimerdinger, but for some unknown reasons, their paths parted. Singed had to go to the Undercity to continue his chemical experiments. So, yes, in terms of Singed's origins, Arcane is pretty close to the original. Experiments, often not entirely ethical, took on an unprecedented scale. Among other things, Singed enhanced humans and animals and sometimes even stitched them together to create bizarre chimeras. This is a hint at Warwick. In both the main lore and in Arcane, Singed wears a bandage on his face because of one incident when Warwick injured him with his claws during a transformation. The proof that in Arcane the scientist has been working on creating this beast all this time is seen in the last episodes of the first season, which also hints at Vander very clearly. With all this, the series logically explains Singed's bandages on his face. Continuing his chemical experiments, Singed paid with his health. Like no one else, he understood the needs of a living organism and injected himself with stimulants of his own invention, which allowed him to work for several weeks without interruption. It is not clear what these stimulants were, assuming in theory it was supposed to be Shimmer, which we see in Arcane. But in the main lore, this substance is not mentioned, just as there is no mention of Silco, and accordingly, there are no events from Arcane that were associated with this chemical. But perhaps Silco and Shimmer are canonical to the main story because Dr. Mundo's biography traces a connection to Shimmer, although it does not mention it directly. Nevertheless, in my opinion, this piece of history was deliberately omitted in Singed's story in order not to spoil the series. Perhaps in the future we will see an update in the game's lore on this matter. Nevertheless, after this missed piece of history, we'll learn that in the lore, Singed did one-off jobs for many clients for several years until one day he was approached by a Noxian warlord named Emistan. The Noxian campaign in Ionia was dragging on, and Emistan needed something to help tip the scales in the Empire's favor, an innovative weapon. Perhaps these events will appear in the second season of the series. This may well be logical because Noxians have begun to arrive in Piltover, interested in using Hextech for their own purposes. One of these characters is Ambessa Medarda, the head of one of the most influential Noxus families. Her story is full of intrigue, power, and determination that made her a key figure in the Noxian Empire. If you're interested in diving into her lore, I already have an analysis of her story on my channel. I'll be sure to leave a link in the description. So, the Arcane universe is indeed different from the game's canonical lore, but that is exactly what makes it special. This is a new look at familiar characters, a different depth of their stories and emotions. I hope this analysis has helped you better understand how the series complements the League of Legends universe, adding new colors and meanings. And if so, I'd be extremely happy if you guys could support me by liking this video and subscribing to the channel. Dear friends, thank you for visiting my tavern, and see you soon for a glass of unforgettable stories from the world of Runeterra.